planet Kesserin 9 has no seasons in the way old records describe them. It has only the slow bleed of its two suns across a sky the color of scorched copper, and the constant hush of ionized wind moving over fields of black glass sand. On the day the atmospheric drift currents ran high, engineer Elias Creed was returning from the Kesserin landing colony when he saw her. She hung suspended from a signal relay tower, arms bound behind her back by magnetic restraint cuffs, her head bowed, dark hair falling in tangled cords across a face burned raw by radiation exposure. Below her feet, the glass sand had cracked into long fracture lines. Like a wound, the planet itself refused to close. A projected holo sign flickered above her, rendered in hard red light. Thief sentence carried. There was no one else nearby. No drone traffic, no comm chatter. Only the wind threading through the relay struts. Elias slowed his grav sled and narrowed his eyes behind his visor. The last time he had seen a body left on public display like this was during the colonial pacification years, and even then there had been something resembling a tribunal first. But this was a girl, maybe 18 standard cycles old, skin dark from solar overexposure, wrists already bleeding beneath the cuffs. He was ready to let his sled drift past. Then she lifted her head, slow and unsteady, and her eyes met his. It was not a look of pleading, it was not fear, it was something quieter, like coals still glowing beneath a bed of ash. Elias set his jaw, reached for the cutting tool at his belt, and murmured something under his breath that wasn't quite a prayer. One motion of the laser edge and the restraint cable parted. She dropped into his arms like something already half erased from the world. Impossibly light, as though her body had stopped believing it deserved weight. He wrapped her in his thermal cloak without a word. Behind them the holo sign kept flickering, its judgment now aimed at no one. He brought her back to Outpost Vel before the twin suns dipped past the ridge, carrying her the way a man carries a grief he never named. Outpost Vel was not much, a half-buried habitat module, its outer shell fused from local silicate composite. Just enough structure to keep the wind and the isolation from getting all the way in. He laid her on the narrow recovery cot beside the environmental core, the one that used to be his wife's post before the station lost half its crew to the second collapse. She was still unconscious, cheeks hollow, breath ragged and shallow. He worked the cuffs off her wrists with the same care he'd once used, disarming a plasma charge, then cleaned her wounds with sterilized hydration gel. Slow and silent, like a rite he'd performed before and hoped never to again. That was when he noticed the pendant at her throat. A lattice of bioluminescent crystal threaded through carved bone-white alloy, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. He recognized the pattern. Anyone who had served in the pacification years knew what such lattices meant among the Ather-Kai. A lineage marker, an oath bond, sometimes a death sentence. He didn't touch it. He turned instead to the nutrient synthesizer, keyed in a basic protein culture broth, and let the unit hum to life. The smell of warming synth protein filled the module, familiar, grounding, the meal of a man who no longer expected to share it with anyone. She stirred, eyes cracking open, empty as the sky before an ion storm. Elias offered her a spoonful of broth. She turned away. "No one's locked the door," he said, voice flattened by disuse. "And nobody here is going to hurt you." She kept watching him. Not with fear now, only exhaustion. After a long moment she took a small sip, testing the truth of his words one drop at a time. Elias nodded and stepped out onto the module's exterior deck. Outside, the twin suns bled orange into the upper atmosphere. Somewhere across the ridge, a Vecran cycle, one of the planet's native filter lung grazers, let out its low resonant call. He lit a synth stick and let it burn unsmoked between his fingers, watching vapor curl into the thinning light. Behind him, the faint clink of a spoon against a ceramic bowl told him she was eating. Their silence for the first time wasn't heavy. At first light the next cycle, Elias walked out to check the perimeter relay. The ground cover was still slick with condensation. He knelt at the edge of the biodome treeline and found footprints, small, deliberate, half-erased like a thread pulled loose. Caught on the perimeter mesh was a strip of red synth fiber, patterned with a coiled sigil he recognized from a supply run 2 weeks prior. A trader and a station chaplain had spoken then of a missing Ather-Kai lineage holder, daughter of Convergence Warden Maka of the Northern Vesser kinship. gone since a skirmish with Concordat enforcement. They said she wore a crystal lattice wrapped in red fiber. Her name, they said, was Nahila, keeper of the undertone. Elias looked back toward the module. The girl sat upright inside, sunlight catching in her dark hair, the same lattice pendant still glowing faintly at her throat. That fiber had to be hers. He said nothing. He clenched his fist, let it fall open again. Far south, dust columns rose along the horizon, ghost shapes gliding low across the flats. He slipped the fiber into his coat and went back inside. Nahila looked up at him, not apologetic, not grateful, only knowing. "Someone is coming," Elias said. It barely carried as a whisper. "Comment if that gave you chills. Let's keep going." Kesserin Landing wasn't large, but rumor moved through it like smoke through damaged circuitry. Slow, acrid, impossible to trace back to its source. That morning Elias walked into the colony supply depot, visor low, a damp cloth over one shoulder. He'd only meant to pick up mineral salts, fasteners, and synth fiber for dressing wounds, but every face in the depot turned toward him with an expression he couldn't quite parse. In the corner, old Wren, the fabrication tech, muttered something to the station chaplain. Neither of them nodded. A boy tapped a ration crate and said, "Just loud enough to carry." He brought that Ather-Kai girl back to his station. Elias said nothing, paid for what he needed, and turned for the door. The depot clerk's hands shook slightly as he sealed the transaction. Before stepping out, Elias paused. "Stay away from my station," he said. "No one needs to die for being curious." No one answered. The silence was the real threat. That afternoon, Nahila sat on the module's exterior bench, gaze fixed on the distant crystal ridgeline. Elias handed her the fiber roll and a warm nutrient pack. "People at the landing have started talking," he said, voice worn thin. She didn't look at him. "What are they saying? That I'm a prisoner? That I've taken an Ather-Kai hostage?" She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "And that frightens them?" "No," Elias said. "It makes them want to kill you." Somewhere above, a Scaran glider shrieked from the relay tower. There was no wind, and yet the drift lichen along the perimeter rolled softly across the glass sand, as if the whole world were holding its breath before something broke. "You could hand me back," she said, still staring at the horizon. "I wouldn't blame you." Elias didn't move. "I've seen what they do to people who don't fit the Concordat's ledger. They don't need a reason to leave someone hanging from a relay tower." She turned to him then, eyes unguarded for the first time. "Then why did you save me?" He looked at her as though the question already carried its own answer. "Because your eyes weren't asking me to. You've got something burning in you that doesn't ask permission." Then, quieter. "And we're about to have a serious problem." He went back inside without another word. That night, the station's deep-range sensors picked up a rhythmic pulse signature moving through the bedrock. Not fast, just slow. Resonant thuds that seemed to sync with something ancestral in the listener's own chest. Elias was on his feet before he'd finished processing the alert particle rifle already in hand. Nahila was already standing on the exterior deck, cloak stirring in the low wind, her eyes dark and unafraid. "They're not coming to negotiate," she said. "Is your father leading them?" Elias asked, eyes fixed on the flat stretch between the terraform field and the ridge. She nodded. "Maka won't say much. Every pulse is a warning. After the third, the convergence drones will engage." The pulse repeated. Elias exhaled and lowered the rifle slowly, like a man setting down his own death sentence. "I don't want to fire on anyone tonight, least of all someone looking for his child. If you go out alone, they might listen," she said. "If I go first, there's no guarantee." "I won't let you spend more blood," Elias said. "Not for them. Not for me." Grav sled silhouettes began emerging from the low mist, dark shapes flickering in and out like static caught between frames. Each rider wore a crest of bioluminescent plumage grown from their own modified skin, faces marked in ash-toned resonance paint. They moved in total silence, as though the planet itself were listening. The third pulse rang out. Nahila stepped forward and took Elias's hand, the first real contact between them, not defensive this time, but deliberate. "Say nothing when you face him," she told him. "Let me speak." "You sure?" "I was the one they left hanging," she said. "Now I'll be the one who keeps them from taking you." When Maka arrived, tall as a support strut, silver-threaded hair bound in ceremonial coils, eyes like cut obsidian, Elias held his ground, no weapon raised, no words offered. and Nahila stepped forward to meet her father. The clearing in front of the station had become a convergent circle. 80 riders standing in absolute stillness, crest plumes untouched by the wind, every particle lance angled toward Elias in a history he couldn't undo. Maka stepped forward unarmed, but his presence carried the weight of a species that had outlived several human colonial charters. His skin was creased like fractured basalt, his eyes sharp and cold. Nahila positioned herself between the two men. "He did not harm me," she said, voice low but unwavering. "It was the landings people who left me hanging," a younger rider shouted. "He is Concordat-born. He kept the warden's daughter." Maka raised a hand and the noise died instantly. He turned to Elias and spoke, his words heavily accented but clear. "Colonists do not save the daughters of those they fear." "I didn't save her because of where she was born," Elias replied without retreating a step. "I saved her because no one else stopped." Maka fell silent, closing the distance until a nearby rider's lance nearly grazed Elias's collar. Elias didn't flinch. "I found this caught on my perimeter mesh," Elias said, producing the blood-stained fiber. "I kept it because if it were my child missing, I'd want some trace too." Maka took it, studying the fabric, his weathered hand tightening around it. He turned back to his daughter. "Is this true?" She nodded. "He never touched me, never asked my name, never for anything. He gave me food, water, and a place to heal. He is a good man." The young rider pressed again. "Then why didn't he return her immediately?" "Because I was too weak to travel," Nahila answered for herself. Maka looked back to Elias. "You fed my daughter with nothing to gain from it. But that is not enough on its own. You will come before the Resonant Council and speak for yourself." Elias nodded. "I'll come. One decision, one girl caught between two civilizations." At the edge of the crater basin, where the Council's holographic sanctuary flared to life in cold blue light, a rider known as Vorn Ashclaw stepped forward, his particle lance aimed squarely at Elias. "He is a contamination. End this before it spreads." A chorus of low, mechanical growls rippled through the gathered riders, vocal modulators built into their armor amplifying dissent. Elias stood at the center of the circle, sweat sliding cold down his spine. Nahila moved between him and the raised weapons. "Enough," she said, and the word cut through the noise like a blade through static. Everything stilled. She spoke in the old resonance tongue of her kinship, her words flowing like current through conductive fluid, of restraint cables, of hunger, of the way Elias had looked at her. She told them of the photograph in his station, his wife and daughter, both lost to the second collapse, just as she had nearly been lost. Her voice held even as the wind rose around her. "This man," she said, gesturing to Elias, "is not Concordat. He is not a warrior. He is not a resonance keeper. He is a station tender. He rebuilds what the void tries to take." The wind died. For the first time, no one answered her with a shout. Only silence, a silence that had begun almost imperceptibly to change shape. 7 members of the Resonant Council sat within the holographic sanctuary, their neural interfaces glowing faintly along their temples, eyes catching the light like embers behind glass. Elias stood in the circle, understanding none of the resonance tongue being spoken, only watching. Maka spoke first, recounting every choice Elias had made. Then Vorn Ashclaw, still coiled tight as a compressed spring, demanded punishment to preserve the kinship's standing. Finally, Nahila stepped forward. This time she didn't raise her voice. She spoke softly, like current settling into rest. "I saw in him what we are losing," she said. "Care that expects nothing back." One of the elder council members asked a single question through the neural link. She answered without hesitation. "If I had to choose again, I would still trust him, even knowing I might not survive it." The silence stretched ritual long. At last the eldest council member gave a slow nod. Maka turned to Elias, his translated words carrying unexpected warmth. "You are cleared. More than that, from this day, your station is under kinship protection. Anyone who harms you declares conflict with the Veseru line." Elias bowed his head. They departed the basin at first light, in total silence. No pulse signals, no resonance calls, only the low hum of grav sleds gliding over dew-slicked glass sand. Nahila walked beside Elias without speaking. Maka followed behind, silent as a support column. Back at Outpost Vel, Elias opened the module hatch, letting in the pale morning light. The same seating, the same environmental core, the same tilted photograph of his family. Nahila stepped inside, quietly lifted the dried flora beside the photo, and replaced it with fresh growth she'd gathered along the return path. No one had taught her to do that. She simply understood. When she stepped back out onto the deck, she paused and turned to him, one hand resting on the crystal lattice at her throat, her kinship's mark. She lifted it free, walked back inside, and placed it beside the photograph of his wife and child. She said nothing. She simply let it rest there. Elias studied the small object, its spiral pattern still faintly stained, and didn't touch it, only exhaled slowly and gave a long, deliberate nod, like the planet itself settling into stillness. Nahila left with the riders. She didn't look back. Every cycle after that, on the first day of thaw season, an Ather-Kai woman would arrive at Outpost Vel aboard a low-grav sled. She never signaled ahead. She left a bundle of preserved nutrient stock, a handful of fresh growth from the ridge, and a strip of synth leader bearing a short message in concordant script. Thank you for the day you chose to save instead of turning away. Elias never replied, but he kept every message, every fragment of growth, sealed in a storage case beneath the environmental core. When he died, those who processed his station found something unusual among his effects, an old crystal lattice, worn by time but preserved like something sacred. One decision, one glance, one shared meal, enough to turn silence into something worth remembering. Thank you for listening this far. May you always be healthy and fortunate. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.